Shalom, dear listeners and disciples. We're continuing to present the parables of Yeshua, the Messiah, from first century Jewish context. I realize that for many of you that have been reading the Bible for a long time, you have developed your own idea of what these parables are. You inherited the traditional Christian viewpoint. But we've been working hard here at Netivyah to research and find out what these parables really mean in the context of the first century world and in the context of the Jewish world in the first century. Today I want to discuss with you a very short parable, but very important one. And it's a parable taken from Luke chapter 5. There is parallel text in the synoptics in Matthew 9 and in Mark 2 of the same parable. I'm going to read it from Luke chapter 5 verse 36. Then he spoke a parable to them. No one puts a piece of new garment on an old one. Otherwise the new makes a tear, and also the piece that was taken out of the new does not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the wineskins and be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. But a new wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And no one, having drunk old wine, immediately desires new, for it says, the old is better. This parable of Yeshua is quite interesting when we look at it in the context of the previous verses before verse 36. Before verse 36, we read in verse 34 of chapter 5 of Luke. And he said to them, can you make the friend of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and they will fast in those days. And then immediately after that comes the parable in verse 36. This is a very interesting context because it actually comes from a midrashic understanding of the Song of Solomon, of the Song of Songs. In chapter 7 of the Song of Songs, I will read from verse 11 on to 13. Come, my beloved, let us go forth to the field, and let us lodge in the vineyards. Let us get up early in the vineyards, and let us see if the vine has budded, whether the grape blossoms are open, and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes give off a fragrance, and our gates are pleasant fruit. All manners of new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. The context, of course, is the Song of Songs. It is the bridegroom, the beloved is the bridegroom, and the context is that they are going out into the fields and into the vineyard to see if the vine has blossomed and if the pomegranate has blossomed. This is very suggestive language in the context of the Song of Songs, but it was interpreted already in the first century as dealing with the love affair between God and Israel, between the Messiah and Israel, the bridegroom and the bride being Israel. And the verse 13 in the English, it says, all manner of new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. And the Hebrew text there matches very well with the concept of new and old, which is used in many midrashic contexts in the rabbinical world of the first century and a little bit after the first century. It's a location that inspires the discussion of the new and old. And immediately after Yeshua talks about the bridegroom coming, and about not fasting while the bridegroom is here, immediately after that goes into the context of the new and the old. the new garment, the old garment, the new patch, the old patch. And there is no doubt in my opinion that this is connected with this text of Song of Songs and with the text in Proverbs chapter 26 verse 10. It says, and you will take out the old before you take out the new. This also is connected with the same context because it's dealing with the blessings that God has given to Israel when they will walk in His path, in His way, and keep His commandments and not rebel against God. So this context is very interesting for the discussion in the New Testament of what Yeshua said. Of course, like many of the parables, when you try to understand them outside of their historical context, then you figure out, you can put anything into anything. The old can become anything, and the new can become anything. And it becomes, like they say in the South, a hunting dog that will go with anyone that will take him. That way, we see that these parables have been interpreted completely out of their context as the old being the Old Testament and the new being the New Testament. And that you can't mix the Old Testament with the New Testament, and those people who are infected with replacement theology are very happy to use this parable in this false context that has nothing to do with what Yeshua is saying. What Yeshua is saying is that, and the point is at the end of Yeshua's statement in verse 39, and no one having drunk old wine immediately desires new, for it is said the old is better. So for those people who want to apply this parable from Matthew and Mark on the Old Testament and the New Testament, they will make a mistake, because the last words of Yeshua in Luke is that the old is better, and whoever drank from the old doesn't want the new. And of course, anybody who drinks wine knows that old wine is much better, smoother than the new wine, and of course much more expensive than the new wine. We let the wine age in oak barrels for months, and the older the better. So Yeshua, first of all, knows something about drinking wine. And second of all, the statement that Yeshua is making here is not about old and wine. It's about the fact that you cannot mix the old with the new. And the principle is called kil'aim. It's a principle that is found in the law of Moses in Leviticus 19:19, in Deuteronomy 32:11. It's a principle that you cannot mix a kind with not his own kind, because you will ruin both of them. And there is time for the new and there is time for the old. And he's talking about his coming, the coming of the bridegroom. And he's talking about the fact that the bridegroom will come, and there will be a time for fasting and for being sad when the bridegroom is not with us. But as long as the bridegroom is with us, we have every reason to celebrate and not to fast. That's the context. And the context, of course, also of the Song of Songs and of the book of Leviticus chapter 26 is the context of not mixing a kind which is not his kind. I have many parables and parallels of the same concept from rabbinical literature. And when I read these parallels from the rabbinical literature, I see that the context here is very much similar to the context of what Yeshua is talking about. He's talking about, that we should not take what we have and immediately seek to patch it up with the new, because it'll ruin the old. And the same thing is true with the Torah. It says we will take out the old before we take out the new. The principles taken also from the famous text from the book of Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything. There is a time for the old and there is a time for the new. And when you have the old the blessing is to use it up first before you take out the new. That's what the text in Leviticus says will happen when there is God's blessing on us, that we will be able to enjoy the old, and then when the old is finished, we'll take out the new and not mix the two together. The context is of the return of the bridegroom and the going away of the bridegroom, and we're all waiting for the bridegroom to come so that we can again enjoy God's blessings upon us. The rabbis bring several examples of this, and I will actually use from the tractate of Avot, from the Mishna, which is the first tractate of the Mishna, a statement by a very famous rabbi called Elisha ben Abuya, that very likely later on in his life became a believer, and we have evidence of this in rabbinical literature. And he brings this statement from chapter 4 of Pirkei Avot, of the sayings of the fathers. Elisha ben Abuya said, a child who is learning, what is he like? He is like ink that was written on new paper. An old man that is learning, what is it like? It's like ink that is written on paper that has been already used and erased before. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Judah, from the village of Bavli, says, the one who learns from the young, what is he like? He like a person that eats green grapes and drinks wine from his own wine press. And the one who learns from the old man, what is he like? Is like he eats ripe grapes and drinks old wine. Rabbi says, don't look at the pot, but look at what's in it. An old pot can be full of new wine, and a new pot can be full with nothing. And from this, the Elisha ben Abuya brings this teaching of the new and the old, and actually comes to the same conclusion that Yeshua came to, and that is that you don't mix the two. You learn what you learn, and you can learn from the old people, the good old wine, the wisdom that they have collected. From the new, that you could learn, but it is like on a new paper, which that's what it should be. You shouldn't try to put the new on the old paper that has been already erased. These similarities in rabbinical literature with the teaching of Yeshua brings us to the idea that the rabbis themselves say that wine is good for the stomach, like the Apostle Paul gives us in the First Timothy advice to Timothy. It says a little wine is good for the stomach. The same way the rabbis say the same thing, and we find these similarities having great influence on the fact that we are dealing with material from the same world, from the Jewish world of the Tanaitic period, dealing with BC to the end of the 2nd century AD. That world, the Jewish world of that time, is the world in which Yeshua and the apostles were. And we all have to be waiting for the bridegroom, looking at the whole Word of God, and not only concentrating on the new, and not trying to water down the new or the old. Each one is respected in its own context, in its own setting. The new is for the kingdom of God. We are waiting for it to happen. We're waiting for it to be fulfilled. Even the promise of Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 to 35 is still in the process of being fulfilled, because it says they will no longer have to teach one another to know God, because they will all know God. We are still having to teach one another. Every church, every Bible school, every Christian university is still teaching one another to know God. And we are teaching our children to know God. That means that the process of the new started with Yeshua's birth, death, burial, and resurrection and ascension, but we are still waiting for his return for the full fulfillment of God's promises. And until then, we're all looking through a glass darkly, through the mirror, and waiting for the day that we will all be known and know each other, and God will know us face to face, and we will know God face to face. And at that time, the old will pass away, and we will live all under the grace of God, fully incorporated God inside of us. Right now, we're still in the process of preparing and struggling and waiting for the bridegroom to return. And may he come soon.